All right, 10:30. So we're going to kick this one off. Welcome and thank you for attending the visualizing departmental business and citizen use of GIS session. Our first speakers in this last part today are Kent Rothrock and Wendy Peloquin of AVINEON. A little bit both about Kent and Wendy. I think everybody knows Kent's name. So throughout all these NCAUG conferences, but he's director of managed services for AVINEON Incorporated. He has 25 years in GIS with a record of helping clients implement solutions for GIS challenges. He has an MA in geography from App State. And we have Wendy Peloquin. Wendy is a business development manager at AVINEON with over 14 years of experience in the geospatial industry. She has her bachelor's degree in geography and a certificate in GIS from the University of Georgia and a master's degree in GIS administration from the University of West Florida. So everybody that's online, please, if you have any questions, enter them into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Everybody here, if you have any questions, we'll wait till we're done and we'll try to get through as many as we can before we move to the next session. For those that are virtual attendees, please make sure your name is correct on your Zoom login so you can get credit for attending. We are recording this session. It will be available on the conference website after this in a few weeks. So thanks for attending, and I'm going to turn it over to Ken.
Thanks, and good morning to everyone. It's good to be back. Again, I'm Kent. That's Wendy. We're going to talk to you about visualizing departmental business and citizen use of GIS. Next slide, please. So quick overview. Basically, I'm going to take a few minutes and sort of lay out the problem, and then Wendy's going to talk about a solution that we at AVINEON have created to address the problem. Next slide. So AVINEON Incorporated, again, as you guys know, I said at the vendor parade that Highland Mapping had merged with AVINEON earlier this year. We're still providing the great services, managed services to the same great clients as well. Now we have global resources and other markets and other specialties that we can help you with in the future. Next slide. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. So what we're talking about today is change in your GIS. So people that manage GIS of all shapes and sizes, you know, those of us that have been around a while, we've grown organically. And that means we've just responded to requests over the years. And our GISs have grown somewhat out of control in many cases. We've got, you know, all sorts of end products. We've got all sorts of layers, maps, apps, databases, integration, staffing changes, and so forth that we have to keep up with. So this thing is constantly changing. Also, we have to change the pieces constantly. So we have to upgrade software. We're constantly chasing software. We're constantly migrating to new hardware. We've got new business processes, people coming to us needing new things, new end products, new workflows. So we've got to try to manage all that change with minimal disruption. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about today. So just check my notes here. One thing to be cognizant of is the concept of a continuous value delivery approach, which is sort of what AGOL is, ArcGIS Online, where they control the versions, right? So every quarter when Esri updates ArcGIS Online, you don't have any control over that. So you need to understand, you need to read those emails where they say, hey, this is going to change, and you need to plan for that change so your maps and apps don't break and the public doesn't come screaming at you. When you have your own managed enterprise, you control the change, right? Although, again, like I said, I've helped people manage GIS for 25 years, and it's a little out of control because we're just constantly responding to demand. So we're getting to a point in the evolution of GIS where we've got to do a better job of planning and managing change. Next slide, please. So the various elements everybody in here is familiar with. You know, we've got the IT piece. Again, with those of you who have implemented ArcGIS Enterprise IT, you now have to be friends with IT because network security is very tightly integrated. The identity store is tightly integrated with ArcGIS Enterprise. We got the products and workflows. We've got all the business processes and drivers of what we're doing in GIS and this constant evolution and constant change we're talking about. We've got people, of course, are the most critical element. And a lot of us have staffing challenges and turnover that we have to deal with constantly. And then, of course, last but not least, data, particularly data models that we have to manage amongst all this change. Next slide. And this is the one where you can just click on through till we get to the big box in the middle. So this slide is just simply posing a lot of the questions that you have to be thinking about when you're looking at changing and managing this constant change in your system. So we need to itemize the elements of the enterprise that can and will be affected by change. Somebody says, hey, I need you to change that year sold field to a numeric field on the website so we can search by year. What all stuff is that going to break? It could break scripts. It can break something where somebody has maybe their symbology tied to a field. So little incremental little tweaks can have adverse effects. And we need to try to mitigate that as these systems continue to evolve and grow. And again, some of the basic things we're shooting for is minimal interruptions, right? We don't want our websites to go down. Everybody screams and yells at us and panics, and we want to maximize uptime. And so therefore we need a granular understanding of our system. Next slide, please. So we come to this concept of baselining or documenting your GIS. And a lot of you are already doing that, perhaps with Excel, Word documents, Visio diagrams, XML, whatever. So we need to do that as well as we can, and we need to keep up with it. So one thing we need to understand is dependencies and interconnectedness. Again, if we make a change to something, who all is it going to impact? And again, we want to do that as well as we can. And again, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't as big of a deal. Now, you know, this monster has grown to where all these tentacles are tied into our GIS, and one little mistake can render it, you know, the whole system down, and then we have a big problem. Because now, you know, I remember the days where we were a little silo and we were the neato guys with the aerial photography in the corner office. Now everybody is tied to our system, and so it's become more and more incumbent that we manage all this change. Next slide. So again, big challenge, lack of current up-to-date documentation. We have a risk of losing institutional knowledge. I have some clients right now that have been there, let's just say, for 30 plus years in a couple of counties I can think of right off the top of my head, and they're retiring. And these are people that know every single thing about their GIS. And when they walk out that door, all that institutional knowledge goes with them. And these are people that built the GIS over the last 30 years. And like I said, they have that granular understanding. And so we need to plan for that. Again, the theme I'm getting at is we must understand and analyze the impact of change. Try to avoid using the turn it off method. So a lot of times I get into projects with people, we're looking at 30 pages of ArcGIS online content, and they're like, well, who uses that service? Why don't we just turn it off and see who yells at us, you know? Probably not the best way to do it. Let's just rename a feature class and see if anybody screams. You know, again, you can have some really unintended consequences there. So failure to plan accordingly will lead to inefficiency, unnecessary downtime, and increased costs. Next slide, please. So leadership needs to analyze impacts and plan for change adequately. We need to improve, you know, we need to think about, can we, as we're changing the system, upgrading whatever we're doing, can we improve it at that point? That's probably the best time to do a lot of house cleaning. And we need to understand large and small scale implications of change. We need to identify and mitigate risk analysis. And again, just understand the impact. We need to document and plan better. So Wendy's going to talk to you about a tool that we have that can help with all this and with planning for change in your system. Thanks.
Thank you, Kent. Next slide, please. So before we jump into the tool, I want to talk a little bit about one of our customers, Traverse City Light and Power. They've been around for about 100 years or so, and Esri has this new thing out called the utility network. And a couple of years ago, they decided that they wanted to make that jump and start moving towards the utility network for their organization. And really, with a lot of that, they're like, this is going to be great. There's all these benefits. But for those of you who are familiar with the utility network, it's not just a simple little data migration and we're going to move everything over. So next slide, please. When we're helping our customers start to plan for the utility migration, these are kind of 8 of the biggest activities that we suggest an organization that needs to go through. And you'll see a couple of those are highlighted in yellow. Documenting your integrations, the configurations, customizations, as well as, determining the level of effort for migrating that data. And that's where we spend a lot of time focusing in that beginning in those planning stages. And so as we were starting these conversations with them, this came up of, well, what data do you have? Where is it at? Who's using it? What format is it in? And really, that led to, well, we have some over here, or this person knows that. And, really led to the effort of starting to, well, how can we consolidate this and find out exactly what the current state of their organization is? And so, they're like a lot of you out there and many other organizations, just, as Kent mentioned, you're growing organically over the years. And when they've had paper maps and data and going digital over, the past 100 years, that's a lot of information that's been out there. Next slide, please. So really we started to, as Kent mentioned, baselining the GIS, finding out, what is going on right now? What do we have? What's being used? So that then we can start moving forward to the future. What maps, what apps is consuming the data and the information? How are we even interacting with this data out in the field? Who's doing what out in the field? And these were all those questions that we had to answer and start digging in to get to that future, which was going to be their data in the utility network and then all of their other applications consuming that data. So next slide, please. And so really we recommend, as we were working through this with them, we recommend a 5-step process. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but really just, finding out, please advance with the animations, what's being used right now, what's not, how are we going to set things up? Because ultimately, as, we're going through, and all of you who've done an upgrade or had to migrate to new server, you don't want to move what you're not using. It's kind of I don't want to say junk in, junk out, but if there's a lot of stuff and you don't know what it is, what you're using, if it's not being used and could be archived, but you don't do that and you throw it in your new system, you're not making any improvements. And, you're going to have some of the same issues that you were having before just on new servers. And so really, the other big thing to evaluate, and one of the things, what's the business driver? Why are you moving to this future state? What is it for your organization? What are you trying to accomplish? For them going to the utility network, they want to just streamline things. This is the next big piece in technology that they were adopting. Get into Pro, utilize some of that new functionality and advanced functionality that they didn't have before. And so that was really why they were wanting to make that move. And so as we're going through and, we've identified what's the problem, what's there. Well, how do we start working on documenting what our current state is, just so we can figure out what the future state is? Next slide, please. So, really when we start to baseline the existing environment, it's, determine what's being used today, what is not being used, how will, the GIS be set up, how is it going to be implemented, and then really moving into how to adapt that, extend it, and then move into your migration before you do anything. Just so that when you get to the point of you're ready to migrate and then go live, if you don't have any of this identified, as Kent mentioned, it's the same thing as just turning something off. You're going to have those issues and problems. Someone who's used to you doing something out in the field is like, oh, well, now I'm doing this inspection and something's missing and I can't do my job. So this is really where, in any project, we want to spend a good bit of time planning and making sure that we're moving forward, so that we are going to minimize those issues. And, really over time, next slide, please. We've had these conversations with so many customers. And while the conversation may be very similar across all organizations, the needs and the requirements are a little bit different. But everyone needs to go through and inventory their data. And so one of the things that we've developed at AVINEON, we do have, kind of a suite of products that we call accelerators, but one of the ones was Model Manager. Because really, as it comes to documenting your data, your applications, there's no easy way. And that's where a lot of organizations we're working with, they're like, we know we need to do it. We all know we need metadata. It's nothing surprise, but that's always the last thing. But for a lot of people, it's really just, how do I get started? And how can I do this all in one place? So I don't have a spreadsheet over here, and then I have my Visio diagram, and I'm having to look at 4 different things to figure out what's going on. And so really, Model Manager allows organizations to inventory your data model, as well as any applications and integrations that you have. And really through this process, though, it's really allowing you to determine, what's being used, what's useful in your organization. Is there a lot of data that maybe you're developing and you're storing out there, but nobody's even looking at it? Is there a better way to consolidate or archive some of that information? And how does it all fit into the business needs of, 1, where you're at now, but 2, where you need to go? Next slide, please. So with Model Manager, the one thing that I do want to stress is this is one of the big things to think about is it really assists with that data governance. It's going to allow you to really dig into the data, look at what you have, identify any dependencies, so that if you do have an application that's out there and you want to make a schema change, you'll know exactly what applications, integrations, any of those use cases that's touching that specific field. And so when you need to make the change, you know what else needs to be updated. So you're minimizing your risk and you're not having all of that downtime. You can see here, there's an example. This is, for the utility, where they're able to break it down by their different network properties, and even looking at what data is being used and how it's interacting, even by the asset itself with the different applications, mobile workflows that they have, and diagramming, just the data as well to the applications. Next slide, please. So really, the whole purpose of Model Manager was to centralize the documentation of their existing GIS system so that then they can make those decisions as they're moving forward to that future state. So really, it's, 1, a tool for documentation, but also something that they can use for their decision making so that they're not going off and just, oh, well, somebody came to me and they requested this, I need to make a change. They're looking at the impact that it's going to have for the overall organization and everybody involved. Because that's, as Kent mentioned, a lot of us are used to at one time we're, siloed off on the side. It's just us. Well, now we're integrating with everybody, every different department's touching this. And while, maybe in an organization where all the infrastructure is stored, maybe in a GIS group within the IT department, but you have editors out there across every different department in the organization who's touching and creating data and managing it. So really this allows you to have that, central repository for documenting what you have. So then as you're going through and being able to evaluate the, breadth of your GIS data, your applications, what are you truly managing? A lot of people are like, oh, well, we have a couple of maps and apps, but what does that mean really? What's the magnitude of that? And then when the changes come, minimizing that risk moving forward. Next slide, please. And so the other great thing too, is we mentioned, next one, please. It's also, it's letting you document those dependencies. You can even take it down to, is the field in use? Is it a view only in the application? Is it editable? Are there any other external systems that are touching that? If you're integrated with a billing system or even your CAMA system for your tax records. So it's really great that, the Model Manager will allow you to document all that and have that information readily available for when you're wanting to make those changes. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this was just an example of the utility when they wanted to break it down by their asset. And they wanted to see, what group is this in, what class, where is it being used? So really, Model Manager allows you to get as in-depth as you want to get, or you can get, a little bit more general if you need to. And so it's really driven by your organization, what your needs are, and what you're trying to document. But it gives you kind of that one-step shop. Next slide, please. And then just want to hit a couple of dashboards. So with Model Manager, we also have some dashboards set up so you can look at this visually. So instead of putting everything, you can see the different use cases. So they have, automated ETL scripts that they're running, seeing what data it's hitting, what fields are in use, what feature classes. Next slide. And then you can even look this and document, oh, well, we know that we have 4 different configurations. There's 2 customizations on our products. We are managing 11 apps. We have 4 maps and 5 different interfaces. So it's giving you that analytics to be able to drill in and really see where and what everything's being used. Next slide, please. And then also, if you have insights, you can create this link diagram. So you can see in green are all of the use cases. So those are the applications that's consuming the data. And you can see the, all the different layers, the points, the names, which application, how many different things that it's hitting and it's consuming itself. Next slide, please. And then, of course, looking at those dependencies. So the dependencies, the data, the use cases, what's consuming the data. And really, it's just a great way to be able to quickly take a look at things in a visual manner as you're going to start making your decisions. Next slide, please. So now we just threw a lot of information at you. I mean, overall, the overall theme here is there's a lot of problems when it comes to documenting and managing the data, figuring out where to get started and how to get started. It's a conversation we have with customers every single day, whether you're looking to migrate to a new system or you just really want to start documenting what you have moving forward. And our Model Manager is one of the ones that some of our customers have really enjoyed starting to use as kind of a one-stop shop for them to start gathering this information all together in one place. No questions? All right. Well, thank you so much. And we know we weren't able to do a live demo today, but if you would like to see a demo, if you have questions, please reach out to Kent and myself and we can certainly get something scheduled.